Okay, so today we are going to be looking at the Icebound Land by John Flanagan. It is a part of the Ranger's Apprentice series, and it is the third book. Just a side note here, John Flanagan has written 3 books with similar characters and timeline as far as like the time period goes. So I think the best order for you to read them, if you're going to read all of them, is Ranger's Apprentice, Brother Band, or the Ranger's Apprentice Early Years. Make sure that you read Ranger's Apprentice first before the Ranger's Apprentice Early Years, and other than that, it doesn't really matter. Like, you can read Brother Band first and then do Ranger's Apprentice, as long as Ranger's Apprentice is before Ranger's Apprentice the Early Years, because that's the way that he wrote it, and I think that's the way he meant it to be read. Okay, so some background. Arlen has basically this kingdom. So they have the the King's Rangers, sorry. And so they're really skilled at archery. They always ride on these like short and stout horses meant to like be more for long distance travel. And they're pretty good at throwing their knives and like stuff like that. So they're really good like fighters, but they're more like nondescript. Whereas knights would be like, I got my armor, I got my sword, I'm gonna slew you, and whatever. So Rangers fade into the background. They're known for their stealth skills. They have these special cloaks that help with that as well. They're like mottled, meaning that they're like dappled with different colors, so they're not all one solid color. And their whole thing is like, if you don't move, then someone's not going to see you. So if they're spotted, they just stand super still. And, so they have their ways of doing that. Okay, so on the other hand, Scandia is known for their fierce warriors, so they're more like their battle plans are typically kill them, not much, whereas Arlen's be like, okay, so we've got rangers in from the north, and we've got like the normal infantry like here. Scandians are just like, hey, let's just go kill them. They're typically sea raiders, so basically pirates, but they don't call them that. I don't know why, but essentially they're pirates. So, and they're super skilled warriors, and they just raid, and Scandia is like super cold. That'll be important later. And, okay, so Will is apprenticed to Hall as a ranger. Evelyn or Cassandra, same person, just Evelyn is her peasant name, and Cassandra is her princess name. So she's the king's daughter, but not everyone knows that. So when she's trying to conceal it, she uses Evelyn, but when she's like in court, she uses Cassandra. So Will and Evelyn at the end of the previous book were captured by the Scandian Jarl Eric and his crew. They're going to be sold as slaves once they return to Scandia, and Eric is unaware that Evelyn is the princess. So, okay, so they finally get to Scandia after this whole grueling trek at sea. Arlens don't do seafair that often. So this is like a whole new experience for them, and especially since they're going over like open water to reach Scandia, it's kind of like scary, obviously, and they hit a storm, and they're terrified. They think they're gonna die, but they make it to Scandia, and they had to make a brief, well, I say brief, but it was like 2 or so months at this harbor area. It's just like an inlet with some shacks. It's literally just for the purpose of waiting out storms, because they know the Scandians are like super good about like sailor stuff and like seafaring, so they know like, okay, so like when this storm comes like through the same time every year, so we have to make a spot where people can wait it out if they leave at the wrong time. So that's where they're waiting, and then once they leave, they finally get to Scandia, and Evelyn and Will are finally separated. Eric tries to keep them together by giving them to Borsa, which is the head of the servants. He's basically in charge of all the servants at like the king's palace thing. It's not really a palace, but it's where the king lives. He's called a Gibral, I think. And basically he's just like their ruler, and he lives apart from everyone else. And also some Jarls live with him, such as Eric, like he would be in that main house. So Borsa is in charge of all the slaves, so he puts Evelyn with the kitchen staff. So basically I think it's just like washing dishes and stuff. And then Will, being able-bodied, is going into the yard slaves. So the yard slaves are they're awful. It's really bad. Like, that's the worst kind of slave to be. It's just all manual labor. And there's like a hierarchy system with the yard slaves for some reason. There's like the committee, which they are the ones, they're slaves themselves, but they delegate the task between the slaves. So like people that they like will get the best jobs, and the ones that they don't like will get the worst jobs, like standing out in the cold and stirring the water in the pond so it doesn't freeze. Yeah, so that one's great. And the worst part about it being so cold is when you're working up they're doing manual labor, so they're sweating, but then once they like stop working, they stop sweating and it like freezes and they're like freezing cold, and they never go inside really, so there's no way to warm back up. So Will is just coming back from his shift at the paddles to keep the ice from freezing because he had a run-in with one of the community members and now they don't like him, and yeah. And so he's like laying on the floor shivering, and he doesn't have a blanket because somebody stole it. And so this guy gives him this weed. It's called wormweed, and basically it's a drug. It's super addictive, and for like the readers know it, he's already like gone. Like his presence of mind is like gone. He is simply a bag of flesh doing what he's told. And so Eric had come to respect them, Will and Evelyn, on this because they were together for like months. And he's come to respect them because he knows that Will was a great fighter, and he's seen his uncanny accuracy with like throwing knives and shooting his arrows. He knows of his courage, and he knows of Evelyn's courage and bravery. And so he sees Will, this husk of a person, walking around one day, and he's really quite disturbed by it. So he calls Evelyn in to see him, and he's like, hey, I have a plan to get you guys out of here. So she starts talking bad about him, and this all plot her plan. And it comes to a certain point where he knows it's going to storm. So he gets Evelyn to go get Will and take him to this hunting lodge. And as they're going, it's snowing, so it's covering any tracks that they have. He also lays a false path. So they make it up to the shack safely. It's just a small hunting lodge up in the mountains, and no one uses it during the winter, so they just have to make sure they're out of there before winter ends and they're all good. And so she's been instructed to give Will a little bit of this wormweed, just gradually in decreasing amounts so that he can like be weaned off of it and hopefully survive. It's not really a sure thing that he's going to make it, because most slaves who are addicted to it don't have the chance to get off of it. Like, it's not really a thing. They just keel over and die one day, and it's seen as a loss. And then they go get a new slave. Like, I mean, slavery is a cruel business. So, it takes most of the winter for Will to recover. Evelyn's able to gradually increase the number of days in which he goes without it. And the main turning point of this story that gives her the big glimmer of hope is, so she's trying to get food for them to eat. There is some stores in the shed, so it's like they're fine, but she's trying to supplement it with some meat. And there was a bow sitting in there in the lodge, so she's trying to use this bow to shoot a rabbit or whatever, but she doesn't have the skills to do it. And so she's exhausted. She sits it by the door, and she's like, I need to unstring that, I'll do it later. And so she's going about making dinner, well, basically just cooking rice. And Will gets up, and he unstrings the bow. And she's super excited because that's the first thing he's done that, like, he hasn't been told to do and, like, shown the will to do in, like, ever. Basically since they came to Scandia. So that just gives her such hope. And then she's out one day hunting, but this time she made herself a sling, because she thinks she did that when she was a child, so she thinks she'll have a better chance of hitting something with a sling than with the bow. So she leaves the bow in the shack, and Will is looking at it, and he's remembering everything, and it's it's so, he just remembers everything. But he has this big blank spot from his time in Scandia. He only remembers when he arrived. And he's freaking out because Evelyn's not there. He's like, did I do something to, like, get her killed, to get her captured? Like, do they know that she's a princess? Because they still haven't figured that one out yet. And then she comes back, and he's like, Evelyn, I'm so excited to see you. And, like, he hasn't spoken, like, anything since they left, since they parted ways. And Evelyn just comes to him, and she's, like, bawling. And he doesn't understand why. Because, like, to him, everything's good. Like, apparently they're not slaves anymore. Like, they're here, they have food, it's warm. But because he doesn't remember any, and Evelyn just comes in, and she's so relieved. And they're about to have to leave for the winter. So that's where their story ends. But while all this is going on, we've got Halt. So Halt is Will's master, I guess, in the sense of that Will is Halt's apprentice. So Halt wants so desperately to find Will. Like, he promised himself that he would. So in the kingdom right now, they're trying to find this guy that's causing some trouble. Well, there are also all of his imposters. Not his plan to make those imposters, but hey, it's helping him, so he's not, complaining. So Halt is instructed by the king to try and, like, find out, okay, who's the real guy. But Halt really, really, really desperately wants to find Will, because he knows that while Evelyn has a chance of being ransomed because she's the princess, Will be killed off, sold into slavery, nothing good. So he devises a plan to get out of the ranger service, so he basically just says bad things about the king. And that's never a good thing, and the king is forced to exile him for a year. And Halt it's so upsetting, because he knows he has to do it, but it's just hard to explain. It's just a terrible matter for everyone, because no one wants to do it, but they all know that they have to. So Halt is exiled, and he's going to go find Will, and Horace is coming with him because his master, he's the apprentice knight, master knew that what Halt was trying to do, and Horace wanted to help because he was Will's friend as well, and he wants to find him. So they decided to go together, and Horace has unofficial permission from his master to do so. So basically, they have to travel through this kingdom called Galissa. And basically, whoever has the biggest army and the strongest will or whatever is in charge. It's pretty much like, hey, I would like to be in charge of this region here. I'm gonna go fight that dude to get it. And so there's these, like, knights, like, that are a little, like, lower on the rank, is how I imagine them, but they'll, like, guard a bridge. And to cross the bridge, you have to pay tribute. Or you can duel them. Well, because normally, like, the peasants around them can't fight, they have to pay. So then it makes them richer and everything. Well, so Horace can fight, so he fights the knights, and then to keep them, this technically isn't in the knight's code, but to keep them from harming anyone else, they take his battle armor and his horse, so that he can't do anything. So, because they're not as knowledgeable as Horace is about, like, the knighthood stuff, so they're able to do this. And so Horace has built a reputation for himself doing this several nights. There's this one knight. His name is Deparno, something like that. I think it's a French name. And he basically tricks Horace into being captured, because there's this one knight standing on a bridge. Horace is like, okay, this is chill. I can just go, duel him, right? Well, it's trapped. The knight is the bait, and then they're surrounded. So Halt and Horace have no choice but to go with this guy. So they take him, Deparno takes him to his castle thing, and he's super cruel. Like, there's people up in cages, just, like, starving to death and withering away. It's awful. So Horace is bothered by this, as is Halt, but Horace isn't really able to, like, control his emotions as well. And but they're there for a few months. Well, I think it's just a couple through winter, because they know that they can't really do anything because there's nowhere to go. So they're just waiting out for winter and try to figure out a plan meanwhile. Well, so finally, they've got a plan. So they eat dinner with this guy every night, and he's finally convinced that Halt and Horace have no challenge to him. They can't, do anything to him. Well, Horace is like, hey, if I challenge you, and will you accept it? Like, he goes through like this whole list of like requirements, like everything. Basically all like the fine print. And DiPerno is like, yeah, of course, like that's the knight's honor code thing. Like, if you challenge me, I have to accept it, right? Well, he's expecting Horace to challenge him. Well, actually, Halt's the one who challenges him. So that's not technically a thing, but we're bending the rules a little bit here. But since Halt is like sixth in line for the throne of Hibernia or something, he's not actually. He's just Hibernian by ethnicity. DiPerno is then entitled to he has to accept the challenge, as it was issued in front of witnesses and everything, and he can't have this brought up against him. So Halt is, of course, going to win. There's like a whole standoff thing. I'm not going to go through it. But so Halt wins, and he technically has control over the DiPerno's castle. But he obviously doesn't want that. His main concern is for Will. So he turns it over to the captain of the army. And so all that's settled, and they go on their way. And yeah, so basically Evelyn is just, she shows more of her princey side in previous books, but in this, she's forced to take more of a lead role in this book because Will is unable to fend for himself. And it's just, Will honestly is like one of the sweetest people ever. Him and Evelyn had gotten really close through like this whole ordeal, and even before that. And he himself didn't even know that Cassandra, Evelyn was the princess until like right before they came to Scandia. And the only reason why she told him was because it was her plan to just be like, hey, ransom me, I'm the princess. But then Jarl Eric said that the leader of Scandia had took out like a death vow on Cassandra's entire family, so she couldn't reveal herself to him for fear that she would be killed. So then she went back to being Evelyn in manner. So it's just the way that she feels after Will is finally able to have a normal life. It's so much friendship. Like, I feel like in a different book, like without all this hierarchy system, like they'd probably be a couple by now, planning their wedding, naming their kids, but they just can't really do that because she's the princess and he's a ranger. I mean, you don't really see that like ever. And Halt, he's just so devoted to finding Will. He feels like it's his fault that he got captured, and to some extent so does Horace. So they're both trying to like amend, and Halt has spent so much time with Will, and it's just really sweet because they're basically like father and son. And Halt's of course older and Will's younger, and he brings like a bright light into his life, and it's just so sweet. So that's it for today. I would actually definitely recommend these books. They're super interesting. Brother Band, ooh, different setting. It's in Scandia, but you get to see Hal, and he's not really like, he starts off as kind of like this outcast, but then he like becomes not an outcast, and then it's just great. But if you want to check those out, I would. Most of them are at the library here in Conway. So yeah, have a great day.